This lesson is a very quick review of principles in chemistry and an introduction into the properties of water, how they interact with biological systems, and why it's relevant to life itself. When we think about life, we need to think about life as being nothing more than chemistry in action. Life is just a sustained chemical reaction that occurs during the lifetime of a living thing. So, if we're going to understand the principles of biology, what makes up life, we need to understand the components of matter and the molecular interactions that make up that living system. So let's go back to our basics. What is matter made of? Matter is made up of atoms. An atom is the smallest unit of matter that cannot be broken down by chemical means. An atom is made up of three primary parts. Inside the center part that we call a nucleus, I will find positively charged particles called protons, and particles that have mass but no charge called neutrons. Surrounding these two in the nucleus are negatively charged particles called electrons. For most atoms, the number of all three particles are generally the same. If I have a helium atom, most of those atoms have 2 protons, 2 neutrons, and 2 electrons. However, there is variation in the number between them that causes atoms to have unique properties that we care about in biology. For instance, some atoms can have more neutrons than protons. You can see here a hydrogen with 1 proton, 1 neutron, 1 electron, but this one has 2 neutrons instead. We refer to these particles with more or less neutrons and protons as isotopes. Why do we care about isotopes in biology? Well, they're used a lot for imagery. If I want to track molecules going in and out of an organism, or I want to take images of it while it's still alive, I can use isotopes to do that. We can also use isotopes to date fossils. If I were to find this fish fossil and I wanted to know, is it 1,000 years old, 1,000,000 years old, 100 million years old, I can date the isotopes that make it up to learn that answer, which is huge for understanding evolutionary biology. Not only can atoms vary in neutrons, they can also vary in electrons. An ion is an atom with more or less electrons than protons. For example, this particle here has 5 protons but 6 electrons. Why do we care? Well, that can give the atom an overall negative or positive charge. In this atom with 5 positive protons and 6 negative electrons, I'm going to have an overall charge of being negative. The same thing can happen with positivity. I can have more protons, 6 in this case, and fewer electrons, 5, causing an overall charge of positive with the atom. Why do we care about them in biology? Well, if you have a positive or negative charge, we can have interactions. We can have some chemistry occur that living systems have evolved to take advantage of. For example, as you're watching this video, you have neurons that are sending signals to each other across your entire nervous system. That occurs by moving positively and negatively charged ions in and out of your neurons. Atoms can combine to form a variety of different bonds, such as a covalent bond where they share electrons, ionic bonds where an electron is transferred, or hydrogen bonds. In biology, we don't care so much about how these bonds form, we care more what effects they have with that molecule or the living system that's working with them. Virtually every living thing is made of only 6 atoms. Carbon, hydrogen, nitrogen, oxygen, phosphorus, and sulfur. Seriously, that is 96+% of any living thing we've discovered. Using these, you can make a huge versatility of different compounds that living things take advantage of. For example, if I take hydrogen and oxygen, I get water. One of the molecules essential for all life that we've discovered so far. If I take carbon and hydrogen, I can get methane, a hydrocarbon that is highly explosive. And if I take carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen, I get sugar, a carbohydrate, the molecule that's used as energy in virtually all living things. You may have heard the phrase that life is a carbon-based life form. Hopefully you've thought about that. Why? Why are we carbon-based? Why aren't we nitrogen-based or phosphorus-based or oxygen-based or hydrogen-based? What is so unique about carbon? Well, if you look at the valence shell of each atom, you'll see here nitrogen has 5 electrons on the outside, meaning it can only hold 3 more. Oxygen has 6, meaning it can only hold 2 more. Hydrogen can only hold 1 more, but carbon's unique in that it can hold 4 more electrons. It can form upwards to 4 bonds with other molecules. This is relevant for life because living things are huge. We are made of giant molecules, and we're going to need a skeleton that can fit a lot of molecules to be as large as we are. Carbon's the only thing that provides that. The carbon atom is the only one that can provide us up to 4 bonds in the outermost shell, and that is readily available to life. That is why we're carbon-based. So the primary objective of this lesson, now that we've reviewed chemistry, is you need to be prepared to explain how the properties of water that result from its polarity and hydrogen bonding affect its biological function. So let's look at the water molecule. The molecular formula of water is H2O, and here's a picture of it. Hopefully you notice that its shape is pretty unique. Most molecules are linear with one atom on the left or right or up or down, but water's bent. These two hydrogens point downward. That's significant because that bend causes the hydrogen region to be slightly positive and the oxygen region to be slightly negative. This means one part of our molecule has a different charge than the other. We refer to that as being polar, having opposite charges. And it is this polarity, being slightly negative and slightly positive at the same time, that enables water to do all the cool things that it does. If I were to zoom into a glass of water, this is what I would see. I would see water molecules bouncing around, but also forming bonds with one another. The negative region of the oxygen atoms are able to form bonds with the positive region of the hydrogen atoms on other water molecules. We refer to this kind of bonding as hydrogen bonding, the bonds between the polar regions of molecules. It's important to note that this is a very weak intermolecular bond. It is very rapidly formed and broken. That is why water stays liquid at room temperature. These bonds do not last for very long, but they do cause three unique properties of water with living things that we want to know about. One you've probably noticed is water pools. It'll form beads, whether it's on a blade of grass or on a table. We call this cohesion, and what's causing those molecules to stack is that hydrogen bonding. Water molecules can bond with one another, forming these droplets, and we refer to this as being cohesive or cohesion. Another thing water can do, hopefully you've noticed this if you've seen a test tube or a graduated cylinder with water in chemistry, that water will stick to the inner sides of the tube. This is because those water molecules are able to form hydrogen bonds with other objects than themselves. We refer to this as being adhesive. So water can be cohesive and stick to itself, and be adhesive and stick to other surfaces. If I have a container of water, something very unique happens. At the surface of the liquid, water molecules will bond more rapidly together with hydrogen bonding than they will in the body or the bottom of the solution. This creates a tension on the surface that we refer to as surface tension. And that surface tension creates a force that can support things like a paperclip or even something as large as a frilled lizard to walk across the surface of the liquid. So these three, cohesion, adhesion, and surface tension, are all a direct result of water's polarity. So let's put it all together with something like a tree. If you've ever wondered, well, how does water move up a tree? They're hundreds of feet high, water's found in the soil. How does it get all the way to the top? It is these properties that make it happen. So a tree is going to get water through its roots in the soil. That water is going to be able to climb up the tree because of adhesion, causing the water molecules to stick to the plant's tubes, and cohesion, sticking those water molecules together as a droplet. But plants don't have muscles. They have no way of sucking that water all the way up. So what is that force driving it against gravity? It's actually evaporation. The leaves on the plant are constantly being bombarded with sunlight. The water on the leaf will evaporate out, and that will cause a gap and a little change in pressure that sucks the water right up. All of this together is referred to as transpiration. Water moves through plants through transpiration. It's generally the movement of water up plants, and it occurs because of adhesion, cohesion, and evaporation. Water is often referred to as being the solvent of life, and this again is because of its polarity. Water is a great solvent because water's polarity enables it to disassociate ions in a solution. Here's what I mean by that. If water is my solvent, here I'm dissolving salt crystals, so sodium chloride, the positive region of the hydrogens is able to surround, saturate, and grab a chloride ion off of the salt crystal. The same thing happens with the positive sodium ions. The negative regions of the oxygen are able to grab that atom and move it away. This is what causes things to dissolve in a solution. So just to remind you again, water is the ideal solvent because it's able to disassociate solutions in water. Now, not everything dissolves in water. Substances that do dissolve in water we refer to as being hydrophilic or water-loving. I want you to think about why something would dissolve in water or it wouldn't. Substances that have an attraction to water will dissolve. So if something dissolves, is it going to be polar or nonpolar, and why? Well, hopefully you're thinking to yourselves it would have to be polar. Why? Because water's polar, it has a positive and negative region. The only way something's going to disassociate in the water is if those water molecules are able to grab onto each atom, and they can only do that if there's an attraction, if it is polar. Some substances like oil, butter, though, are referred to as being hydrophobic, meaning water afraid. These do not dissolve in water. Why? Because they're non-polar. If a substance is nonpolar, water molecules don't have a positive or negative region to attach to pull the molecule apart. Another unique thing about water is ice. When water freezes, it expands. It also can float. Very, very few substances can do this. Most substances are actually more dense when they're solid, causing them to sink. Water, however, because of this crystalline formation, has larger gaps between its molecules, enabling it to float and causing it to expand. Why is ice so important? Well, it does a couple unique things in living systems. If something like a lake were to freeze over, that ice will actually insulate the liquid water below. This is the same principle as an igloo. It is warmer in an igloo than outside of it, even though it's made out of ice. Why? That ice can block things like wind, but also heat can get trapped in under the ice. This enables a lot of living things to survive when lakes and bodies of water freeze over. Ice expansion can also change Earth's surfaces. If water goes into a crack as a liquid and it freezes overnight, it expands and chips away at the rock near it. That's going to cause surfaces of Earth to change over time. And this is a huge deal for living things. We are made mostly of water, water that has to remain liquid. If the liquid water in your body were to become solid, you would die. It'll form crystals that'll penetrate all of your cells. So we have to expend a lot of energy in order to keep ourselves liquid. Last thing you want is to evaporate and become a gas, or to have the water and you become a solid. Water also has a unique specific heat capacity. It is solid below 0 degrees Celsius, liquid between 0 to 100 degrees Celsius, and a gas at 100 degrees Celsius. Why do we care about this? Because this is something living things take advantage of to regulate their body heat. If you sweat, have you ever wondered why that cools you down? You aren't sweating out cold water, and that's not making you chill. When water evaporates, those molecules they vaporize or become a gas because they become energized. They're taking energy with them. So the reason why you sweat as a way to regulate is those liquid particles on your skin obtain your heat energy and take it with them as they evaporate as a gas. So let's look at a famous experiment that's often done with water. If I were to ask you how many drops of a liquid could fit into a penny without breaking, meaning it beads up and it doesn't pop, and I were to give you two liquids, distilled water and salt water, which one do you think could form the largest bead? Regular distilled water, meaning there's nothing in it, or salt water? Well, let's see. If I were to just drop each one a drop at a time, I would end up with distilled water making a larger droplet. Here's some actual data from my classes in the past. With distilled water, they could do 43 drops of water without it bursting. With salt water, only 21. Could you explain why this is happening? What is causing distilled water to be able to form a larger droplet than salt, or conversely, why can't salt form a larger droplet? Well, it's because of that hydrogen bonding. If I were to look into the distilled water, I would find tight hydrogen bonding between all of the hydrogen molecules, making it very, very cohesive. However, with salt water, those sodium and chloride ions that are floating around are blocking or preventing the cohesion, preventing those water molecules from attaching to one another. That blockage is why it can't form as large of a droplet. Now, water is unstable. Water will naturally ionize into two different ions. It'll dissociate into hydrogen ions, which are positive because there's no electron, or hydroxyl ions, OH minus. When there's a concentration of H plus and OH minus that's the same, we refer to those solutions as being neutral. But if I have a higher concentration of hydrogen ions than hydroxyls, that is what I refer to as being an acid or being acidic. And if I have the opposite, more hydroxyls than hydrogens, that solution is basic. This is what makes up the pH scale. When we're measuring how acidic or basic a substance is, we're really measuring these dissociated ions. Is there more hydrogens? You're an acid. Are there more hydroxyls? You are base. Is the amount the same? You are pure neutral water. Here are just examples that we'll encounter in this class. Vinegar is acidic, black coffee, rainwater. Urine's acidic, by the way. Don't believe me, pee on baking soda, see what happens. Baking soda is a base, ammonia, house cleaner, bleach. The big thing we care about with the pH scale is you want to know it's a 10-fold change between each pH. For example, if I was to move from a pH of 1 to a pH of 2, that's going to be a change of 10 less hydrogen ions. If I were to go from 8 to 7, again, a 10-fold change. This time, since I'm becoming more acidic, I'm going to have 10 times more hydrogen ions than I would if I was still at a pH of 8. If I were to move from a pH of 10 to a pH of 8, now I'm moving 2 pH levels, so I would have to do 10 each level, and that'll be 10 times 10, or 100 times the change in hydrogen ion concentration. Another reason we care about pH in biology is that living things are very sensitive to it. We are made of proteins, and proteins are sensitive to their environment. If it gets too hot, too cold, too acidic, too basic, those proteins fall apart and no longer function. So this is why we have to be mindful of pH. Fortunately, living things have evolved something called a buffer solution to help protect them against rapid changes in pH. A buffer solution is a solution that has a weak acid and a weak base. By having both, if for some reason the environment were to become more acidic, a buffer will throw a weak base at it to bring it closer to neutral. Vice versa, if something becomes more basic, you can throw a weak acid at it to keep it in a buffered range or a neutral range. Living things want to remain stable like that because our proteins fall apart and our reactions stop if we skew in one direction over the other. A great example of this is human blood. Human blood is slightly basic. We are all slightly basic on the inside. Your blood remains basic even though you eat acidic and basic substances because any change in the environmental pH is met by that buffer solution. To finish this lecture off, I'm just going to give you some examples of questions you could be asked. For example, I could give you a water molecule and ask you, could you label the diagram and make sure you label the oxygen, hydrogen atoms, as well as the partial charges, which creates water's polarity. You do want to remember that the hydrogen region is positive and the oxygen region is negative. I could then follow that up with asking you what causes water's polarity and how does polarity allow water to be such a good solvent. I'm not going to answer these questions in the video. Hopefully you're able to discuss them with your table mates and find the answers. Water tends to hang out in groups of 5 molecules. This is due to hydrogen bonding. Label the 4 hydrogen bonds shown below in the diagram. Explain what a hydrogen bond is. What is it and how is it different than a covalent or an ionic bond? I might also give you some case studies and ask you to explain, justify, or demonstrate what's occurring. For example, in this water-free response, a farmer hears a news report regarding a frost advisory for his region. To protect his strawberry plants, he decides to spray water on the crops prior to the frost that evening and early morning. Using your knowledge of the structure of water and its properties, justify, make a claim, and provide reasoning for a farmer's reaction to the frost advisory by explaining how 2 of the 4 emergent properties of water fit this example. This should seem counterintuitive. If I am a strawberry farmer and my berries freeze all the way through, that's bad. It's going to destroy the berry. Why would a farmer thinking that the crop is going to be covered in ice spray it with water before the freeze? Something to think about. I hope this video was helpful in your understanding of chemistry and water, and I will see you all soon.